Hello, everyone out there. My name is Westrom. I am filling in for Sherrod DeGrippo today. Sherrod is down in Georgia with no power because of the hurricane. So she will be with us in spirit, though. There's a couple of fun slides that we'll go through as we kind of work our way through the presentation. So what are we going to talk about today? It's one of my favorite topics. And you want to see. We're going to talk about how actors think, right? So how do threat actors choose their mark? What's their decision making? What goes into that? Where do they start? Who do they target? And what are we doing, right? And so this should be super fun for everyone, I hope. I am watching chat, so please be interactive. I will do my best to kind of keep tabs on that as we kind of walk through and talk. So next thing, who am I? My name is Wes, as mentioned. I've been in InfoSec for about 10 years. I'm currently at ProofPoint. Done a lot of different things. Kind of got my start in development, then went to the FBI. Was an FBI special agent in the cyber division for about 5 years. Jumped out, went to Express Scripts, did a bunch of security ops work. And now I work at ProofPoint. And I lead a team that does intelligence for one of our products. I also oversee all of our APT research and have a small reverse engineering team. I'm not in Atlanta, Georgia. I am actually in St. Louis. But the rest of that is all true. So I'm on Twitter at Westrom. And again, super happy to be here, filling in for Sherrod. All right, so Galaxy Brain. We're going to dig in on this. What are they thinking? Why are they doing what they're doing? And why are they choosing the targets that they choose, right? Here's the interactive part. You're on your PC, grab a piece of paper, grab a notepad. I want you to think and imagine that you're a threat actor, okay? So you want to do, let's say, attacks through email, all right? I'm email provider, let's talk about it. Who would you target? What do you know about them? How can you find out about them? What do they have access to, right? What's publicly available knowledge about you or your organization, right? That's one piece of it. That's the targeting selection. But then also, like, we're going to do some social engineering, right? So who would you pretend to be? Who would this person potentially be excited or maybe nervous about getting email from that would evoke them to click on something, right? What's your payload going to be? All right, we're going to use malware. We're going to do credential phishing. Maybe we're just going to do some social engineering that would lead to kind of a BEC attack, right? What kind of lures would you use? Right? So what would be the actual context of what you're sending? You know, that's going to really tie back into what you know about your target or not, right? So we can do some generic things that are across, you know, a particular area that we would all know about, right? Shipping notifications. That would be something that most people in the US would be accustomed to getting, right? And what do you want to achieve, right? What's your end goal? What is it like that you're trying to get to? When would you stop and move on to a different target? You know, how many yachts do you need in the Black Sea is another way to think about it, as many of our actors that we track have yachts apparently. So this is a kind of interactive exercise. Please do try to think these questions out. This is what we're doing all of the time from an intelligence perspective for the actors that we kind of track at ProofPoint. So vectors and landscape, we'll kind of go through that. So email is still the #1 threat vector. Yeah, it's hard to believe, but it is. ProofPoint, we see about 5 billion emails a day. Most of it is spam. We kind of define spam as unwanted mail, no threat. And about 1 billion emails go through our tap protection. And that's kind of our dynamic sandboxing of attachments, URLs, things like that. It's mostly large enterprises. We do have some government, NGO, kind of Fortune 1000. So that's the vector. What do you weaponize, right? What's your weapon of choice? URLs, attachments, pure social combo, right? Some of the most interesting threats that we see will lead with pure social engineering, strike up a conversation with a target, potentially numerous emails back and forth before they'll actually deliver a malicious URL or an attachment. And then this is Sherrod in cartoon form on the far right here, kind of working through the computer on what we would do, right? So like I said, she will be giving us some cameo visits today. So let's look at what we see for the most part. Here's some of message volume regarding kind of URLs and attachments. So what you can see here is that we see a lot more unique URLs than we do attachments. Right now, because of cloud hosting and a variety of third-party services, it's very trivial and almost costs the actor nothing to create unique URLs that go out in emails. So whereas, if we're doing attachments, we have to use some sort of post-processing, packing, whatever it happens to be, to obfuscate it in a way that won't change the ability of the attachment to detonate, but we'll give it a different hash. So URLs are far more prevalent than attachments. What about types of attachments, right? So this is what we see. We see a lot of PDFs. We see a lot of docms. I'm sorry, we don't see a lot of docms. We see a lot of docs. So PDF is the most. PDF, not using a lot of PDF exploits, surprisingly. Usually it's links to things inside of a PDF. But definitely a lot of Microsoft Office products, attachments, things like that. So let's jump into some examples. Travel and hotel. So really what we're talking about, we'll mention actors and scale. So, social engineering at a very detailed level does not scale very well, right? So imagine yourself, and I asked you to do this exercise, and you're gonna pick a target, you're gonna have an objective, and you're gonna go do this research on this target. Now I want you to imagine how much time that's going to take. And now I want you to do that across 1,000 organizations, right? That can be hard, right? So actors have to deal with scale issues as well. There are definitely ways that they have been successful in doing that, whether that's kind of open source tools or the amount of data that we put out there as just people on the internet to begin with. So what are ways that they're getting in? These are maybe not direct people, but they're also trying to jump into customer service addresses, reservation systems, complaint systems, abuse, IT, shared mailboxes, right? So these are all shared mailboxes and many times. So they're not even at a particular person, but at a particular job function. So let's look at one of those. Revenge RAT. So it's a campaign that basically we see it active year to date. Not very much, 68 messages, 54 in hospitality vector, right? So very specific targeting, reservation aliases. So really what they're trying to do here is establish remote access, right? They're looking for that foothold in hospitality through basically a RAT. Now, what are they gonna do after they get that RAT in place? Well, I don't know. What would you do if you were to gain initial access to reservation systems for hospitality? I can think of a couple of different things, depending on what your motivations are, right? So if you are, looking for financial information, there definitely could be a lot of that available to you. Maybe you're looking for espionage types of things, right? That could be another angle. So there's lots of different ways that actors can leverage similar access. It makes it difficult to ascertain kind of what that end goal is, right? Your end goal that you're thinking about right now. So this is the demo of it. So here's the document. It has a receipt. It was actually a macro doc. So you would have to enable the macros. It was called Reserva.rtf. So these are the actual email addresses that they were sent to. You can tell a lot of hotels, a lot of generic reservation email accounts. So targeting like hotel groups, as I mentioned, LCG kit, it's something that ProofPoint found. LCG stands for linear congruent generator. So it's an encryption thing, but basically it uses equation editor exploits. So here's an example one, coronavirus update. You can see the lure right here to the right. Very well done. Obviously, they took a lot of time and effort to duplicate something to look professional. It only went to 5 different hotel groups and about 400 messages in a single day. It hit specifically stuff in Cairo, and it was service agent, director of sales, senior accountant, and accountant, right? So that was the groups they were going for. Now we can make some assumptions based on those titles, potentially, of what the motivations were, but it's still a little bit unclear. We'll jump over to Remcos RAT, A/B testing. So sometimes actors will send multiple emails, right, to see what works the best from a social engineering aspect with their customers, or I'm sorry, not their customers, their victims. So here's one. As a package delay, I would say most of us got something like this during the pandemic that's going on. So they tried this one out. They also tried a sexual harassment one out. We do see a fair number of sexual harassment lures being used. These are surprisingly effective because it usually catches people off guard, and they're willing to click on it and find out what's going on. So let's jump over to some ransomware. Nemty. So emails contain a bit.ly link. So a bit.ly link or a URL shortener goes to a different URL, to a password protected zip file, it has a password, and then inside it is the ransomware. So when you were thinking about what you would do and how you would do it, did you think about just attaching something directly? Did you think about just using the URL that goes to the payload? Or did you think about obfuscating it with one more layer by using a URL redirector or by putting it into a password protected zip file, right? You can see quickly that you can start small and then start making additions to it to make it better, right? And that's what the actors have done over time. So zip archives with Nemty, only 12 messages hitting manufacturing and energy. So very small campaign. And obviously here, this is what you get to see if you end up falling victim to Nemty. So another one, March general meeting. Here's the page here. And again, small. All right, another ransomware. Sometimes it's not super targeted, right? So a variety of subject lines, small campaigns, 3,000 messages, hitting a lot of transportation. Some of the campaigns were really big, right? But what's interesting here is, they were asking a question of people, right? So when someone asks a question of you, are you more likely to respond or to answer a question or to click on a link than if you don't answer a question? So as you're thinking about formulating what you would do, are you thinking about asking a question instead of making a statement, right? Are you thinking about trying to get interaction from your victim, right? This is all of the type of psychology that actors are going through on a day-to-day basis. It's their full-time job. Here's another payment page on .onion. I like the pictures here. So that's the green dot reference on this particular slide. All right, so let's jump into Nanocore. It's the cops. Another really good social engineering tactic is to pretend to be some sort of law enforcement. So Nanocore has been around a long time. It's a .NET remote access tool. We saw some campaigns focusing on COVID and National Police Force. So this particular one we're showing, it's from Taiwan Centers for Disease Control. There's also another one from the Dubai Police Force. I'll show you clips of those in a minute. Tactics and tools. So containing ISO attachments or URLs linking to ISO attachments with an executable that drops Nanocore. Okay, so again, we see another example of the use of container files, right? So an ISO file is kind of like a zip file. It's a file that contains other files. So it's a common tactic that attackers will use to kind of obfuscate their true intent or to bypass security controls. So this one hit 450 organizations, mostly UAE, Italy, Taiwan, Uruguay, and across 51 different verticals. Here's what they look like. These are different campaigns. It was actually pretty fun to piece them together because on face value, they look different, but then you can see these, they're like passport screenshots down at the bottom. And we were able to connect them across a couple of different ones. But yeah, pretty well done. They took a little bit of time and effort, but they also left artifacts across them. So let's talk about that scale issue again. So obviously generating a lure like this takes time. And if you're one person and you're trying to scale to more than one victim, you've got to figure out how to scale that, right? These are some of the ways that we're able to track threat actors across time is because it's too expensive for them to literally rebuild all of their infrastructure, do all new targeting and lures, rebuild new Word documents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So we see them reuse different pieces. And that's a key way that we're able to track actors over time. So now we're gonna jump into some fun stuff. Threats to chickens and their associates. What is Wes talking about? All right. So this next part, we're really going to talk about, again, actor mindset. Who are these actors? Where are they? What are they thinking? What are they doing? Well, most of these actors are in Eastern Europe. They live in countries where their hacking activity is largely accepted. as long as they're not doing it to other people in their community or in their country. So as long as they don't do that, law enforcement will largely leave them alone. It's viewed as a day job. This is not a adolescent in their parents' basement just having fun or having mischief. This is their 9 to 5. They come into work just like you and I do. In fact, they're organized just like you and I are in our professional lives. So here is a snippet of an indictment talking about how the Fin7 actors are using Jira to manage all of their work, taking care of their infrastructure, their malware updates, keeping track of what networks they're in, right? You can imagine if you run a large botnet and you have a large number of infections, you need someone to organize that, right? It's a business for them, a very lucrative business, unfortunately, for many of us, but it's certainly a business. It's one that's accepted. It's one that their families are proud of them for. And it's one that their government, as long as they don't get into the wrong trouble, will largely turn a blind eye to. All right. So let's talk about some other threats that we found in terms of trends, right? And this kind of comes back to, again, actor psychology, right? Once you know something, you just keep pulling on that thread. So last year we saw a bunch of threats to fast food chains, pretty much anything that had a value menu. And it was really interesting because it was a targeted campaign and they were very small volume. And we saw them continually targeting for several months. So why fast food? Well, fast food has potentially a lot of payment data, right? In small transactions. What else do a lot of fast food restaurants not have? They also don't have chip in many restaurants. So it's possible that these actors were targeting institutions or organizations that had not matured their payment systems to keep them from a lot of payment fraud, payment card fraud, right? Okay, so then what happens? Well, we're kind of following along and we're talking to some researchers, and we were able to get it down to where our researchers were able to say, well, it's Wednesday, which is 99-cent hot dog day at X fast food chain. And on certain days, these actors would attack certain chains. So they might go after chain A on Wednesdays, chain B on Tuesdays, chain C on Thursdays. But what we found is that a lot of this was in line with essentially what was going on in that business on that day, or that there were special events or occurrences that were happening at that time. So we tracked this for a while. Fast food restaurants with specials on certain days. And then all of a sudden, they shifted their targeting to anyone who had anything to do with chicken in fast food. So lots of different groups that were focused on their chicken sandwich, that's their thing, chicken restaurants kind of countrywide. So we saw that for a while. You're like, well, why chicken, right? Well, that's an interesting shift, but there's a transition here, right? So if they were already hitting all fast food, they then kind of got into, well, a sector of fast food, right? So it's just really bizarre, and it gets even more bizarre because then they transitioned to poultry farms. They were sending targeted emails to poultry farms that were selling poultry to chicken fast food restaurants. Really interesting, right? But you can see the more you know, you can keep following that thread. And then they jumped into VARs, or values added resellers. So actual IT companies providing services, presumably to fast food or poultry farms. So as another way to gain access to those things. Now, when we got into poultry farms, maybe you're thinking, well, there's not payment data in poultry farms. True, but poultry farms, they have a lot of large transactions, right? So maybe they're using poultry farms to spoof to get into other restaurants. Maybe they're going after just large transactions in a BEC style. It's a little bit unclear on what that would be. But RDB providers and VAR was another target. So what do we have? Fast food to chicken fast food to chicken supply chain to IT value-added resellers. It's pretty interesting traversal from targets, right? So as you're thinking about in your mind, if you were a threat actor, you were choosing targets, think about the things that you would learn as you're targeting someone, right? You gain access to one environment, you learn a lot about that environment, but you also learn a lot about the people that that victim does business with. This is especially useful for BEC attacks. It's also incredibly useful though for social engineering, for malware or credential phish or whatever it is the actors are trying to use to get into their next victims. So we definitely see that type of transition and movement from target to target, not so much just sporadic, like, oh, I'll try this over here, I'll try this vertical over here. You go with what you know, right? And you use that to your advantage. So let's talk about threats to you, security professionals. Humans, number one target, by far. This is a lure that's basically supposed to be an open source intelligence dashboard from European Banking Federation, right? So this would be intended to go to security teams, things like that. Think about the access, right? So what's the actor going after? Well, in this case, you're going after access, because most security teams have greater access, much like admins, like system administrators, things like that, than the normal user. So if they can get to get your access, then they can pivot from your access to a lot more systems. So security teams are a huge target, just like system administrators or people who have elevated privileges that would allow the attacker to do a lot more once they gained access. But also think about what you can learn by reading a security team's email. You can learn a lot. You can learn about their recent incidents. You could learn if you've been detected. You could learn where their biggest vulnerabilities are. There's a lot of value that threat actors can gain from compromising a single security professional at an organization. So hopefully you're getting farther through the interactive exercise and you're thinking about in your mind what it's like to be a criminal and to try to social engineer some organization for something that you're trying to do. Please don't take that next step. But yes, in our mind, it's important to really focus on what we're going to do. So here it again, just to refresh. You're a threat actor. You're doing stuff via email. Who would you target? Who would you pretend to be? What's the payload? Malware, credit phish, successful fraud. What would you say? What would you want to achieve, right? These are all the sorts of things in this kind of order that actors go through. So I will stop at this point and take some questions, and then I have some more content that we can jump into.
Thank you. Wes, while we just have this brief break, I just want to remind our audience that please, you can also reach through your question through the chat. You can actually, reach out to Wes as well in the virtual launch. If you have any questions, please, you can ask him right before he continues to the next presentation. Thank you.
All right, well, let's jump into some more content. I'm not seeing any questions.
It seems as if there's one in the Wes in the question. All right, I see Karen Woodruff. I think she's asking, do we know what happened with chicken hackers?
Yeah. So they're still alive and well. So the group that we believe to be behind that has moved on to different targets, but they're still alive and well because again, they're in Eastern Europe where they're almost untouchable.
That was a good one. Let me see. Oh, she said, thanks, great story. Okay.
Yeah, I got the Q&A up now, so I have the chat up. So
okay. Yep, you can write on. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I want to talk about COVID-19 a little bit. So, because again, it's certainly very pertinent to all of us, and it's very pertinent to social engineering right now for pretty much everyone, especially as we head into the fall and everything that's going on in the US and worldwide. So one of the things that's been really interested about the social engineering use around COVID is that it's been everything. So what I mean everything, I mean is a lot of times we'll only see social engineering around a particular theme only be like malware delivery, or it only will be used in kind of credential phishing or in BEC, email fraud types of situations. We've seen COVID, coronavirus, and even more recently, the derivatives of the pandemic, which I can talk about a little bit more generically, used in social engineering pervasively across all threats, all delivery tactics, all payloads. So to include URLs, attachments, credfish, lures, BC, the file names of the attachments, the domain names of the URLs, they all have some spin on the pandemic, COVID, coronavirus. We're seeing tons of different malware. Remcos, Bazaloader is getting a lot of attention right now in the news, which is a close, we'll call it relative of the trick. There's a little bit of code overlap there, but they are different malwares. Lemon Tree, Net Support, IceID, Zloader, which is another banking Trojan. Guloader, it's a loader that we track. Loader being multi-stage malware where you get the loader as the first payload, then it loads additional malware downstream. Some Parallax, Agent Tesla, right? We're seeing lots of different malware, all focusing on COVID. So how much? Well, Q2, we saw 213 campaigns, where a campaign is, for us, it's a group of threat activity kind of grouped together that we believe to be done by a single actor in a very tightly scoped amount of time. So usually a day worth of email. We have 9 different actors that were using COVID themes across 20 different countries. We're going to talk about the global landscape here in a second, using 15 different languages. So if we come back to our original, our task, right? Were you going to target someone in your country, or were you going to target someone in another country? Do they speak the language that you speak? Are you fluent in the language of your target, right? Now, why would you attack someone else in a different country? Well, we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, right? It might be a lot safer for you if you don't have to worry about law enforcement in your country. You only have to worry about law enforcement in another country. But to do that, you're going to have to up your skills. You're going to need to be able to use something probably better than Google Translate to fake your victims, or to make them think that you're legit. So we saw, again, over a huge number of customers, more than 5,000 customers saw some form of COVID-19 lures in millions of messages. So lots and lots of campaigns. This is really specific to, like I said, COVID or coronavirus kind of use. We saw even more than all of this if we were to say generic pandemic stuff. So for example, we saw a lot of shipping invoices for masks, large mask orders going to like healthcare industries and things like that. So normally we wouldn't think of that as like directly related, but we saw a lot of these, we'll call derivative plays of social engineering, or things that are just related to something when you would have a global pandemic. Maybe it's testing, maybe it's supplies, maybe it's toilet paper outages, right? There are so many different ways that you could play this, but not without directly saying COVID-19 or coronavirus, right? Now, why would they not directly say it? Well, because all of the security vendors kind of got a hold of it, and we started looking at things that were really focused in that space. And so finding intuitive ways to get around that, but still evoke emotional responses from the victims was what the actors did. So this is what it looked like in April. This is kind of what we saw in terms of the threat. Now, what you can see here is that Europe is seeing the majority of it, right? And if you recall back in April, that's where most of the coronavirus stuff was, except for in New York and the US. Fast forward to June, and we can see that where we have physical threats, AKA where we have a lot of pandemic activity, we also had a lot of email activity. So we saw, a lot more email activity in the US and South America as it spread across the world. All right, there's the countries we saw. All right, so what do the threats look like? All right, who picked they would do a Zoom lure? I'll raise your virtual hand because What's everybody doing now in the workplace? Zoom, right? So we saw a lot of Zoom phishing and Zoom lures to basically grab user creds. Now, why would they grab user creds? Well, a lot of people use SSO for Zoom, so those creds probably work in a lot of different places, right? So here's a campaign that we saw specifically, has a really nice, nicely done lure, and yeah, come celebrate with me. You know, virtual cocktail party. Who wouldn't want to go to that, right? Now, it's a birthday party, right? Maybe you don't know the person, but maybe you'll go ahead and click and see what it's about. Bazaloader, which I mentioned earlier. So this was in early April. Bazaloader was very new and just kind of getting out there. COVID payout, annual bonus, right? Speaking of those themes, right? So we talk about government subsidies or checks, right? Governments helping their citizens by giving them money to survive through the pandemic. You could imagine that two things. One, threat actors would probably be really interested in getting some of that money. And also, it would make a pretty good lure. If people are sitting at home eagerly awaiting some sort of communication from their government about money that they might receive during these difficult times, that they'd be pretty excited to click on things. So tactics here, mass mailers. Mass mailers is a huge tactic right now. So what are mass mailers? They're third parties like SendGrid, Constant Contact, things like that. We see a lot of actors compromising those accounts of legitimate people and then blasting out to their entire address books that they've got stored in these third-party systems to deliver their stuff while also impersonating the person who has the account. It's actually been really successful for them. Remember we talked about creating those unique URLs? That's one really great way to do it, is through third-party mailing services. So in this one, Bazaloader, which then downloads Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is an open source security tool. Actually, I apologize. It is not an open source security tool. It is a private security tool that you have to pay for to get access to. It's used by lots of red teams and penetration testers. In this case, we have threat actors that use it a lot as well. A cracked version, obviously. So volumes, 4,400 messages, around 470 customers. But some of the earlier campaigns were really big, 180,000. So, remember, this is just the delivery phase. So again, we talked about scale. Let's say I drop Cobalt Strike on 469 different environments. How am I going to monetize that? At what speed could I monetize that, right? Because Cobalt Strike takes us from automation, right? If I break into a third-party mailing account and I can send email out to 470 different places, right? Or 4,000 messages, that's pretty easy. In many ways, it's pretty trivial. But if I wanted to then go hands-on keyboard and move laterally through that environment or escalate my privileges, that takes more time, right? And so as an actor, and you're thinking about what you're going to execute on and at the scale you want to execute on, you have to really think about automation. You got to think about how many people, et cetera, right? Because the longer your payload is on that victim network, the more likely it is to be discovered. So this particular one, it targeted companies in retail, manufacturing, technology, healthcare, pretty broad. So here's another one, a German COVID themed ransomware. We see, we're a global company, we see stuff in all languages. This one was the pretty cool lure. It's done really well. And as mentioned in German, Federal Republic of Germany, the federal government. This is obviously, if you were a business, small business, the decision to close your business due to COVID-19, that'd be something I probably want to open up and read. Something that would be unexpected, right? Now, we could sit back and kind of say, well, I would never look at that. I would never open that because that's crazy for my government they would ever send that to me in email. We're living in crazy times. Governments are doing things that they never thought that they would do and communicating with citizens in ways that they never did before. So it's really not as crazy in kind of the environment that we're in a pandemic that these sorts of things or communications would happen, and actors are playing on that. So TA407, also known as Site Librarian, they were definitely using some COVID-19 lures as well. So we saw their thing is portals, credential phishing. So, reactivate your account, protecting yourself. This was low volume, which most of their stuff is. It's targeting universities or medical centers. So Silent Librarian, their target is largely research or access to research. And so that's what they're focused on from a university and medical perspective. Obviously, lots of medical research is something that many different threat actors are interested in and have been interested in during this pandemic. Guloader, as mentioned, is another loader. Here's a bit of a play, right? So we see COVID-19, but we're talking about ventilators. If you recall, a few months ago, everything in the news was about the number of ventilators we have, how many we need to get, how many we're going to be able to access. People were emailing people all over the world trying to source ventilators. So if you know that's happening, like you're already on networks and reading email of those things happening, it's a natural transition to start using that as your alerts. This one particularly was a Microsoft Excel doc that was using an equation editor exploit, which would then download Guloader, which is mentioned was an intermediary downloader. And then that downloader would turn around and download Azarol, which is a remote access Trojan for, again, hands-on keyboard so the actor can do what they need to do. Another actor, TA516, we internally refer to them as Smoking Dro. There's a long story there. It's funny, but just have to trust me on it. So COVID-19 hospital visits, another really good lure right on COVID-19 theme. You can kind of see it here. This is an anonymous email asked to be sent to you, a family member basically saying they have COVID-19 and you need to go get a test and you need to get this requisition form. It's pretty good. It was sent, back in the beginning of April when everything was really chaotic. And some people, will definitely fall for this. ICE ID, who would have thought about Family Medical Leave Act as a possible lure? I wouldn't have, but it's really good. It's even better if it looks like it's coming from the government or like your HR. If my HR sent me something like that in a simulation, I'd be a little offended because you would expect that, right? So this is a form for leave under the FMLA, basically to open it up and do what you need to do. If you receive this, you might click on that because you don't know what it is. It was actually a Word doc that has a macro. It drops ICE ID, which is a banking Trojan, and that's pretty much a banker on your box. 10,000 messages roughly, mostly a little bit in manufacturing, but spread out across many different industries. All right, let's look at what some actors were doing. So TA551, it's an actor mostly working with AirSniff. Again, threat hijacking. So, we talked about gaining access to email. One of the most useful things that actors can do is actually read your email. So if you have a compromised account and they read that email, they can search that email, they can learn a lot about you. They can also use threat hijacking. It's a technique where they will steal your email threads. And then instead of using a blank email with a newsletter template, they'll simply respond to the thread, or they'll use the content in a new email like you're forwarding the thread. So if you open it up and you see something that you've written, or you've seen people talking that it lends an incredible amount of credibility to this being real. So we definitely see a ton of threat hijacking. It also helps you scale, right? Because if you can steal messages and make it look like you're more credible, instead of having to read them and then write them yourself, you can scale. You can do a lot more stuff. And we definitely see threat hijacking at scale. So this one was password protected zip file using Word docs. AirSniff was again the final payload. What else we got? We've got Blue Flame. These are kind of like our fun names. We officially go by TA 2718. Economic stimulus payment. So we talked about this a little bit ago, right? Basically, here's your information about the payment that you're going to get, the stimulus payment from the government so that you can weather this pandemic. This was to Spain, Malaysia, Turkey, Vietnam. But again, relatively trivial. Guloader downloader that loaded Agent Tesla, which is a rat. for remote access, hands-on keyboard type of work. What else we got here? TA544. So they like to use phishing themes. I'm sorry, shipping themes. And so you'll see things like billing support, invoice numbers, usually Word docs or Excel docs. Excel seems to be pretty popular with them. And then it usually goes to DriedX. Now, we've seen shifts in TA544 recently. We really assess them to be an actor that's distributing different malware. And we're seeing them shift from like regional focus in maybe Italy or Japan to more global focus. So it looks like they potentially have a new customer for malware distribution, and they're sending out things more globally. And when they're sending out globally, it looks like it's usually Erstef as opposed to DriedX. But again, invoice themes. TA54562, contracts. So contract reviews, renewals, modifications, other things using SLK files, which is a specific Windows format. Small crime actor for the most part, small volume of threats. It drops net support. So again, another remote access Trojan. If there's a theme you're getting from today, it's versatile access, not like one thing that's going to happen, right? So they want to land on the box and have remote access to it so that they can assess it to see what they want to do with it. All right, so Modest is another one. So this is an interesting actor. They actually do both BEC and malware. And so this one is malware. It's phone book specifically, which again is another remote access Trojan. You guessed it. So again, smaller crime actor. So volume is usually lower, a little bit more targeted. In this case, manufacturing, technology, and healthcare were being targeted. The next one is Reserva. And so this is my final slide. So this is a Portuguese language campaign. Again, we see languages, all languages from all over the world. This one was PowerPoint. We don't see as many PowerPoint decks as I would like. I wish we get to see a lot more. But this one is PowerPoint that actually will download Revenge RAT or NJ RAT. And again, small crime actor, usually targeted. In this case, really looking at hospitality and room reservation themes. So PPAM was the extension of that file, but PowerPoint, definitely. So here, I'll kind of round out, like we gave you some more detail, more ideas on what we are seeing in the wild. And that's kind of where you are in terms of thinking to yourself, like, okay, if I'm an actor, what would I do? And then looking at what actors actually do, right? Both in small scale and large scale attacks. So I'll open it up for questions one more time, and we'll see.
Wow, thank you, Wes. I would say that was an excellent presentation. It was filled with a lot of informative stuff with different method that is employed by attackers. I'll go ahead and try to remind our audience that if you have any question for Wes, please you can feel free to ask it, or you can actually put that in the chat. And also, if you want to reach out to Wes, Wes also has his virtual lodge. Just at the end, he's going to put out where you can reach him out at Twitter and at Facebook. Thank you. I see they have some questions in the question and answers.
Yeah, I see Tony's question here. Let me answer it. So, do we see PDFs that are actually malicious? We do, but it's very rare. So the majority of the activity that we see does not actually leverage a vulnerability or a CVE with its corresponding exploit. Now, we have some, right? So like yesterday, somebody showed me some dynamic data exchange stuff, some DDE stuff. We've got some equation editor stuff, but we don't, that's mostly Office docs. We're not seeing PDF exploits like we used to, 5 years ago or whatever it was. So it does happen, but it's pretty rare.
Thank you, Wes. I think it is okay.
All right, I don't see any more questions. It was a pleasure to come on today. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.